Harry Potter em Edimburgo, na Escócia. É um tour sobre contando a vida da J.K. Rowling, como ela viveu, os lugares que ela se inspirou para criar a história Harry Potter. E se você quer assistir, vem com a gente!
We're going to be talking all about Harry Potter, and I get paid for this because somehow I'm still a child and it's working out. So, who here is a big Harry Potter fan? Amazing. Who here is being forced to be here by a big Harry Potter fan? Nice, okay. We've got some squibs amongst us, that is fine. This tour will hopefully be as enjoyable for you as it is for the massive Harry Potter fans. We are going to be talking about some of the history that inspired Harry Potter as well, some of the stuff about the witch trials in Scotland, which obviously had a huge impact on the stories. But we're also going to be talking quite a lot about specific examples of things that J.K. Rowling was influenced by in Edinburgh and that inspired specific things in the Harry Potter series, as well as seeing some of the places that she actually wrote the books. So, who's ready to get started? Perfect. Does everyone here have a house that they know that they're in? Go on, what house are you in?
Ravenclaw.
Ravenclaw? How about you?
Gryffindor.
Gryffindor? How about you? Hufflepuff? Gryffindor?
The yellow one.
Gryffindor? Hufflepuff? We have some people high-fiving over being evil over on this corner. So, I personally, as you could probably guess, am a massive Hufflepuff, and I'm very excited to spend the next couple of hours telling you about all of this stuff. So, if you follow me just slightly up the road, we're going to turn right into the city chambers of Edinburgh, under where those flags are, and we're going to take a look at the handprints of J.K. Rowling and the mark that she has left here in Edinburgh. Back to the beginning and start talking about the origins of Harry Potter in J.K. Rowling's life. We're going to start right at the end, just after J.K. Rowling has published all of the Harry Potter books, because obviously everyone knows that the Harry Potter books have made a massive impact on the world. They're one of the biggest franchises in history. It is a massive industry to this day, but it also does a lot for the city of Edinburgh because of the amount of people visiting Edinburgh for Harry Potter tourism and things like that. Edinburgh's council does pretty well out of that. Everyone's very happy about it in Edinburgh, and they created an award for exactly that purpose, to recognise people who had brought recognition to Edinburgh. And J.K. Rowling was actually the first ever woman to receive the Edinburgh Award, which sounds like Edinburgh is a very sexist city, but it was also only the second ever Edinburgh Award given out. The award was invented in 2007 and given to J.K. Rowling in 2008. And one of the big things about the Edinburgh Award is that you get to come here to the city chambers and put your handprints in the floor in gold. And so if we come down here, we can see all of the most recent recipients of the Edinburgh Award up at this end. And as we head down this way past Professor Peter Higgs, the discoverer of the Higgs boson, very intelligent man, not quite intelligent enough to push his hands in fully, all the way down, we finally get to J.K. Rowling right here in 2008, the first one, Crime Writer Ian Banks. We're going to jump back now from when J.K. Rowling is obviously now incredibly rich and successful, back to the early days of Harry Potter, when she had the idea, but she hadn't started writing yet. Famously, as she said in a ton of interviews, the idea for Harry Potter first came into J.K. Rowling's head when she was on a train to London, and the idea of a little boy being told that he's a wizard came into her head, and that's where the entire thing stemmed from. She was actually taking that train to London to pack up all of her things and move out to Portugal, because she just got married to a man who lived in Portugal, and she was pregnant with that man's child, and she went out to Portugal, she had the baby, but eventually ended up getting divorced and moving back to the UK with her infant daughter and moving to Edinburgh. And the reason that she moved to Edinburgh is because this is where her sister lived. Because J.K. Rowling's sister lived here, there was a place that would support her while she didn't really have a job or any way of finding a place to live. And so she moved into her sister's flat, which she shared with her sister and her sister's husband for a little while, until she finally managed to get signed up for government benefits and receiving some money and could rent out her own flat, and she moved in there. J.K. Rowling always describes this time in her life as being the poorest that you can possibly be in the UK without being homeless. So despite a lot of rumours that were spread in a lot of very big newspapers across the world, J.K. Rowling was not ever homeless while she was writing the Harry Potter books. That's a slightly sensationalised version of events that makes a bit more money as a headline. The truth is, she was very poor, but she wasn't ever living on the streets. There are also in newspapers tons of stories about J.K. Rowling writing in cafes around Edinburgh. And people talk about this as if J.K. Rowling was writing in cafes because she had to, because she didn't have anywhere else to write. The truth is, she obviously had a flat. She could have written at her flat, but the problem was that her daughter, her baby daughter, would not go to sleep unless she was walking around, bouncing the baby, rocking her about, walking around the city in some way. She couldn't just leave the baby still, or it wouldn't sleep. And so J.K. Rowling would spend most of her days here in Edinburgh getting the tram out from where she lived, because at the time she lived over in Leith, which is all the way over that way, and is now quite a nice area of Edinburgh. But back in the early 90s when J.K. Rowling first moved there, has anyone seen the film Trainspotting? So that is early 90s Leith. That is set in early 90s Leith, and it's a pretty accurate depiction of what early 90s Leith was like. So it's not the ideal place to be raising your infant daughter, and she didn't want to spend too much time there walking around with her daughter, so she'd get the tram all the way into the centre of town in the old town here, and she'd walk around these streets, and she'd sit in coffee shops, and she'd write. The Daily Mail ended up writing an article about how J.K. Rowling only wrote in coffee shops because she couldn't afford the heating in her flat and she was scared her baby would freeze to death. J.K. Rowling claimed that article was quite overdramatic. She actually ended up suing the Daily Mail for defamation because of it and gave all of the money to homeless charities in Edinburgh, which was really nice. Now, just to show how much of a contrast it was between J.K. Rowling beginning the Harry Potter books and J.K. Rowling ending the Harry Potter books, if you look out behind me, you can see over there a very big, very fancy square building. Can everyone see the very fancy building on that one? So that massive building with the big clock tower on is the Balmoral Hotel, and it is the most expensive hotel in Edinburgh. Now, J.K. Rowling, when she was getting towards the end of the Harry Potter books, had a lot of pressure riding on her. J.K. Rowling was expected to write the last book in this series that everyone in the world seemed to love, a series that she had constant publisher deadlines coming at her for, a series that if she didn't finish this last book perfectly would be a massive letdown to all of the fans. You can imagine the pressure that she was under. It's an incredibly stressful situation. She even broke her arm around this time, and there were rumours that she'd broken her arm on purpose to delay having to write the book so that she could push back some of her deadlines. I don't think those rumours are true, but it does show how stressed she were that was everyone's immediate conclusion when it happened at the time. And so, when J.K. Rowling needed to get away, by this point it's the end of the series. She's actually remarried, she has 2 daughters now, but she has a husband that she can leave them with, and so she leaves them with her husband, and she comes to the Balmoral Hotel, and she rents out a room in there, and she thinks she's going to stay there for a couple of nights and do a final run over the Harry Potter books and get everything finished. She ends up staying in that room in the Balmoral Hotel for 6 weeks. That room is room 552 in the Balmoral Hotel, and when J.K. Rowling finishes writing the last Harry Potter book in that room, she is obviously incredibly excited. And the first thing she does is she goes straight to the minibar in that room, and she goes wild. She drinks half the minibar, gets blind drunk, and in her room is a bust, a stone marble bust of the Greek god Hermes. And J.K. Rowling takes that marble bust, and she takes a Sharpie, and she writes on the side, J.K. Rowling finished the last Harry Potter book here. She collapses into bed, falls asleep, wakes up in the morning with a terrific hangover and finds a graffitied ancient bust next to her bed. She immediately calls down to reception and apologises profusely for what she's done, but the Balmoral Hotel are not upset at all about what she's done, because if you go to that room now, that room will now cost you £1,000 for a night, and that room is now called the J.K. Rowling Suite. It has a nice bronze eagle door locker on the door, and if you go inside, you can see that bust of Hermes under a perspex frame with that graffiti still on the side of it. The hotel have had a lot of problems with fans constantly going in and going up to that room and taking selfies outside the door, but I don't work for them, so it's room 552. Go wild. Anyway, don't go there and take selfies. They'll be very annoyed. We're going to head down that way next, and we're going to talk about the real history of witchcraft that may have inspired a lot of the themes of the Harry Potter books. So follow me to know how many people on this tour would love to find out that they were a witch. Okay, I'm seeing quite a lot of hands. So if we went back about 300 years and you came here, you may be lucky in your wish, but it might not quite work out the way you wanted it to. Unfortunately, Scotland has quite a dark and horrible history with witches. And the reason for that is the Scottish witch trials. During the end of the 1500s and the very beginning of the 1600s, The version of Catholicism that was spread across the UK at the time was obsessed with purging evil spirits and demons and witches, and it was quite likely that if you lived anywhere in Scotland, you could well be accused of being a witch. And this wasn't Hagrid knocking the door down and teaching you all about the magical world and taking you to Diagon Alley. This was a slightly more sinister encounter. Do you know what kind of things might get you accused of being a witch back then? Yeah. Sorry? Getting killed? Yeah, I mean, if you came back, people definitely might think it was a bit suspicious. How about over here? Did you have your hand up? It's all right, don't worry. So, yeah.
Medicine, like practicing.
That's a really big one, actually. Yeah, anyone doing anything that was kind of, well, anyone trying to invent new things in any way. So if they were experimenting with medicines that weren't accepted already at the time, you might be accused of witchcraft. If you're doing anything that's different to the way it's normally done anywhere in Scotland, you may well be accused of witchcraft. And that even stretched to having red hair. One of the most common things that you'd be accused of being a witch was being ginger. And the amazing thing about that fact is that this is in Scotland. This is the Scottish witch trials. Scotland is the country with the highest percentage of red-headed people in the entire world. And this is the country where they decided one of the criteria for choosing who's a witch is that they might be ginger, which explains why so many innocent people ended up dead. The reason that we're standing here to talk about this is at the bottom of this hill. If you can see down there, you can now see it is a very lovely cultural area. We've got the Scottish National Gallery, we've got all sorts of museums and the portrait galleries down that way as well, Waverley Station. All of that area used to be one massive lake. And if you were ever accused of being a witch back then, during the witch trials, this is where you'd be brought. And you'd be thrown into that lake with your arms and your legs tied together to find out whether you were a witch or not. How would we know whether you're a witch or not, you ask? Well, here's the answer. If you're thrown into that lake and you float, that is proof that you're a witch. Witches float. It's one of the main things that we know about witches. And if you do float, that means you'll be pulled out of the lake and burnt at the stake. The alternative is that you sink. And if you sink, that does prove that you're not a witch, but it also proves that you're dead because you've drowned. The only way that you could survive a witch trial is if you could somehow manage to get back to the surface, which was very difficult with your hands and your feet tied together. And the thing that made that even more disgusting in this lake was that this lake was called the Norloch, and it was where most of Edinburgh's sewage drained to. Everyone's tipping their buckets of sewage out of the window, it's rolling down the hills, ending up in the Norloch, and then they're throwing people into that lake if they think that they're witches. It is a horrible period in Scottish history, and it's left a massive impact on the country, the same way that it has with England and even with Denmark, who have the most witch trials of anyone in the entire world. And Scotland is actually third on that list of most people killed during the witch trials, and it's not an exact number because of the fact that we don't have exact figures. All of these witch trials were done by different towns and cities all over Scotland, and so a lot of what's happening is just terrible record keeping. It's assumed currently that between 4,000 and 8,000 people were killed during the Scottish witch trials, but we have no way of knowing anywhere closer what the actual number would be. So, obviously, that incredibly dark history has a massive influence on the Harry Potter franchise. J.K. Rowling ended up moving to Edinburgh while she's writing this book that's all about witchcraft and wizardry, and so obviously took a fair amount of inspiration from this city. And we're going to start looking next at specific things in this city that she took inspiration from. Obviously, Hogwarts is a very, very big part of the Harry Potter series, and the castle itself, Hogwarts, takes a lot of inspiration from Edinburgh. The big one is obviously the castle. We're going to head up and we'll get a nice view of that now. But once we've been up and had a nice look at the castle, we're going to head down and we're going to get a nice view of another building that I think may have had much more of an impact on the way Hogwarts works than Edinburgh Castle ever did. Edinburgh Castle is very much a visual reference that they used for the design of the films and the way that the films would look. But Harry Potter, the book series, is a lot more based in a Hogwarts based on a school called George Heriot's School. And we're going to talk about George Heriot's School quite a bit later on because it had a massive impact on the Harry Potter books and played quite a big part in J.K. Rowling's life. Next, if you follow me up the stairs this way, we're going to go get a nice view of the castle and talk. We have a lovely view here of Edinburgh Castle, and it's only a short stop. There isn't a huge amount to say about the castle before we head down those steps and start talking about something a bit more substantial. But Edinburgh Castle does have a very important part in the way that the Hogwarts set is designed for the Harry Potter films, as I mentioned. And the reason that we know a lot of these things about specific locations in Edinburgh that are how J.K. Rowling pictures things that she wrote in the books is all to do with the production of the films. Back when Warner Brothers started making the films, J.K. Rowling was very dedicated to these films being made in keeping with the tone of what she imagined everything looking like, and so she was very involved with set design and things like that. And what that involved was she went around Edinburgh and drew loads of sketches and sent them to Warner Brothers so that she could use those, so that they could use those sketches as concept art for what these sets would look like. And one of the sketches that she did, well, that she did several of, was sketches of the castle from all different angles, and Warner Brothers used that quite a lot when they were choosing a castle to use as a real-life reference for what Hogwarts should be. And mostly, they ended up CGI-ing the castle in a lot of the shots. Most of the shots are a different castle from somewhere else in Scotland, CGI'd into some hills in the Highland that don't really have a castle on. And so they didn't end up using a real castle in a specific place, though there is one actual castle that they did use CGI'd into a different place. So you can go visit that castle, but for now we're going to head down the steps this way, and we're going to talk about Diagon Alley. A lot more to talk about there, so follow me just down the steps there. See bits of George Heriot's school over there. It's the very big clock tower, the turrets, very castle-like. That is the school that I was talking about when I said that Hogwarts was more based on an actual school in Edinburgh, and you'll get a much better view of it round the corner if people do want to take nice photos. The only reason we're stopping here is because it's a very narrow round the corner and outside pubs, so we don't want to stop and disturb them. But as we head round that way, you can stop and take photos as we go past. We just can't stop and all together and talk for ages. So we're here to talk more than about George Heriot's school, though, about the street that we're about to walk onto. Because whilst we'll talk about George Heriot's school a bit more later on in the tour, this street is one of the biggest pieces of inspiration for anything in all of the Harry Potter books, and it is, of course, the street that inspired Diagon Alley. We're going to head down that way and talk about it when we can actually stop a bit about halfway down Victoria Terrace that way. For now, as we walk past this way, if you look out to the right, you'll get a really nice view of all of George Heriot's as we get around the corner here. So feel free to take any photos, and then we'll gather up slightly further down the terrace so we're not in the way of any of the businesses, and we'll talk about Victoria Street and its influence on Diagon. Alright guys, so there are numerous pieces of evidence for the fact that this street is the real Diagon Alley. There are also several other streets that claim to be the real Diagon Alley. For example, here in Edinburgh, there are about 4 streets that have signs up saying they're the inspiration for Diagon Alley. There's a couple in London, there's one in York. The main reason for that is it's a very good way to sell Harry Potter merchandise. If you open up a Harry Potter merchandise shop on your street and you say it's the inspiration for Diagon Alley, you're probably going to sell a lot more and get a lot more visitors. So it is a great business strategy. But the reason that we know this one is the real deal and not the other ones is firstly that J.K. Rowling actually said this one is herself in a couple of interviews, and also the sketch thing. J.K. Rowling did several sketches of this street, both from the bottom end, so she could just see up and around the corner there, and from the top end looking down this long expanse here. And she sent those to Warner Brothers. They were used as part of the inspiration for the sets used for Diagon Alley. But if we go back before she's doing those sketches, back when J.K. Rowling's living here, back when she's writing the books, back when she's taking in all the inspiration she can, there are a lot of things here that gave her ideas for things in Diagon Alley. The biggest one is a shop that used to be just below where we are now. If you go all the way down that way, you can see on the right there is a shop called the Museum of Context, which you'll see as we head down. It's actually, now it's the oldest Harry Potter merchandise shop in the street. It's been open since 2004, but back before that, it was a different kind of shop altogether. It used to be a shop called Robert Cresser's Brush Shop. It closed in 2004 because no one wanted a shop that only sold brushes anymore, but it was the biggest purveyor in the UK on any high street of brushes, broomsticks, any kind of sweeping implements. It closed in 2004, but the man Robert Cresser is a very interesting man. He owned this brush shop, he'd been operating it for years, and if you ask anyone that lived here back then and went to Robert Cresser's brush shop ever to buy a brush, they will tell you the same story. And I have this on good authority from my friend Angus, who went there with his grandmother growing up, because he grew up here in Edinburgh. I actually grew up in the north of England and moved here about 6 years ago. So I never went with my grandmother, but Angus did. And Angus remembers this story very well. because he went in with his grandmother, and Robert Cresser, who owned the bookshop, was this kind of slightly doddery old man, slightly eccentric, but whenever anyone came in to buy a brush, he would do the same thing. You may be thinking that this man was the inspiration for the broomstick store in Diagon Alley. That would be the obvious assumption, but no. Because every time anyone went in to buy a brush, he would tip a pot of ash on the floor and he'd tell them to sweep it up. And once they'd swept it up, he would tell them that he made them sweep it up because the brush chooses the sweeper, not the other way around. This man is the inspiration for Ollivander. J.K. Rowling has mentioned Robert Cresser by name a couple of times, and the fact that she's been into that brush shop a couple of times and had that same experience, and that really is the closest to a literal one-to-one inspiration of a real person to a character in Harry Potter that there is in the Harry Potter books. It's up there with McGonagall, who we'll talk about a bit later because of another strange coincidence that ended up happening with the McGonagall character. But other things on this street that inspired Diagon Alley, obviously right at the bottom you'll see as we walk down there is a large joke shop named Ahahaha, which is a brilliant name for a joke shop. It's been there for quite a while, and it also has on the front of the joke shop a massive novelty pair of glasses and nose sticking out of the front, and very similar to the description of the massive awning on the front of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, Fred and George's joke shop, which has a huge face sticking out with speech bubbles saying all kinds of things. It is very much based on this shop at the bottom of this street. Also at the top of the street there used to be a massive fancy bank that looked a lot like Gringotts is described at the top of Diagon Alley. It is unfortunately now a Pizza Express, which doesn't work quite as well, but it used to be a bank. Also, there's the fact that this street is a ramshackle cobbled street that curves its way down a hill, which is exactly how Diagon Alley is described in the books. And the street literally does go diagonally down from George IV Bridge to the grass market at the bottom, which may have been the inspiration for the name Diagon Alley. Now though, it is your chance to walk down the real Diagon Alley. Before we do though, I'll say one thing. If you do see shops that you want to go into, don't go into them right now. I know that sounds like a silly thing to say, but it's happened before. If you do want to go in anywhere, make a mental note and come back here later. At the end of the tour, ask me, I'll happily direct you. It'll be like a 5-minute walk. And if you do want to come back here, I would always recommend the Museum of Context, who have been there for ages, over the Boy Wizards, because the Boy Wizards have opened like 20 over the last year and they keep taking over these small businesses. And they've also been sued like 12 times by Warner Brothers for not being registered in any way as an official merchandise seller. So I would definitely go Museum Context over Boy Wizard. But we're going to go down these steps in a second. We'll let this group go past first, but then we'll go down these steps and we'll head on to the actual street. As we head down to the bottom, you can take any photos you want, and then we'll be on the grass market. And we're going to talk about, well, first of all, has anyone here been on the Sandyman's Free walking tour already? The history one? Nope. That's cool, because we're going to recap one of the stories, because it does have a link to Harry Potter that we don't mention on the free tour. So, if you follow me down these steps, we're going to go down to the bottom, and then I'll talk to you about a lady named Maggie Dickson. Look away as we go past the shops like down there, because they have one very simple business model. They buy one pig a day, they shred the pig, they put it in the window and they sell it until all the pork's gone, and that carcass is kind of just in the window all day. So look to the left as we go past that one if you'd rather not see that. Other than that, follow me down this way to the bottom. Guys, while we're here, I'm going to tell you about a lady named Maggie Dickson and the character in Harry Potter that she may have inspired. You might also notice that she inspired more than just a Harry Potter character. She also inspired her own pub, Maggie Dickson's Whiskey and Ale House, just over there, which is why we're doing this story here. But after that, we're going to head up that way and into the graveyard and start looking at some actual names on the graves of Harry Potter characters. But for now, we're going to talk about Maggie Dickson. So, Maggie was... The story of Maggie Dickson, in summary, is basically the story of a lady who works in an inn in Edinburgh in the middle of the 1700s, and she's sleeping with a guy that she's not married to, and she ends up getting pregnant and hiding the fact that she's pregnant by binding up her stomach with belts, which unfortunately leads to Maggie tragically losing the child in childbirth. And Maggie is sentenced to death under the Concealment of Pregnancy Act. She's sentenced to hang by the neck right here in the grass market, because that's the way the law works here in the 1700s. She's brought here and she is hanged. But the amazing thing about the story of Maggie Dickson is that she survives her hanging. And because the way that Scottish law works means that you can't be punished for the same crime twice. That's a specific thing written into Scotland's law constitution, so that you can't punish anyone twice for the same thing, which means that because Maggie didn't die in the first hanging, they legally can't hang her again. Which means she gets to live out the rest of her life completely happily, isn't punished, she ends up marrying the guy, they have multiple kids and both die of old age many years later. It's the happiest hanging story in the entirety of human history. But it also gives Maggie a nickname, and that nickname may have led to the creation of a character in Harry Potter according to J.K. Rowling. Maggie's nickname was Half Hang It Maggie. Can anyone here guess which character in Harry Potter she may have inspired? Either of you, same time. Nearly Headless Nick, is that what you were going to say? Is that what you were going to say? Perfect, 10 points to every house. So yes, J.K. Rowling has said a couple of times that hearing the story of Maggie Dixon is what gave her the idea of this ghost who was beheaded but wasn't fully beheaded. And the original idea was that the entire reason that he's a ghost is that he was partly beheaded but he didn't fully die, so he remained here as a ghost. And then as the idea of ghosts in the world of Harry Potter evolved, that kind of changed and it became that he's just a ghost who didn't get properly beheaded. But the idea did start as the idea that he has to stick around because his execution didn't work properly, and that's why Nearly Headless Nick is still here as a ghost. Nearly Headless Nick, of course, played by John Cleese, a big famous British comedian, but there is another very big English comic name that was originally going to be in the Harry Potter films. Does anyone know who they were going to play? So there's a guy called Rick Mail. Does anyone here know Rick Mail? He made a TV show called The Young Ones and a lot of very popular kind of cult 90s British TV sitcoms. No, where the birthplace of Harry Potter is. Yes, the Elephant House Cafe, that is correct. They have it painted all the way across their window. Can I share a secret with you? They're lying a little bit. So the truth is about the Elephant House Cafe that J.K. Rowling did write there. She wrote there a couple of times, she would write in a couple of different cafes around Edinburgh, but for reasons that we're going to explain later when we see the real place that Harry Potter may have actually started, we're going to talk about that later, but basically there is another cafe where J.K. Rowling spent most of her time writing Harry Potter in Edinburgh. The thing with the Elephant House Cafe is that she ended up writing some stuff there later on, but it definitely isn't where she started writing the first chapters of Harry Potter, because at the same time there was a cafe she frequented much more regularly that we're going to go and have a look, have a nice, well, at least a view of down the road later on. But those windows up here of the Elephant House Cafe are where J.K. Rowling sat reasonably often when she would visit the Elephant House Cafe a couple of times and do a little bit of writing on the early books in there. And from those top windows, she had a view out over this graveyard on the other side of this wall, and she also had a view of two quite large buildings. Those two buildings were George Heriot's school and the castle. And J.K. Rowling talks about the idea of this school being a castle on a hill coming from the fact that she was sitting in there in the Elephant House Cafe one day, not actually writing Harry Potter, but she was sitting having a coffee looking out of the window and did have the idea of putting the school in a castle by combining features of looking at the castle and looking at George Heriot, and that is where a lot of the inspiration for the actual school came from. So it may well be the birthplace of Hogwarts, but it isn't quite the birthplace of Harry Potter. We'll see that later on. For now, if you carry on up and round, we're going to get to the actual entrance of the graveyard, and we can... So we're about to enter Greyfriars Kirkyard, famous of course for the story of Greyfriars Bobby, one of Scotland's most famous legends, the story of a dog sitting by his master's grave, protecting his grave, for a period of about 14 years. It's a beautiful story, and the main theme of it is the loyalty and devotion of this dog. This dog's insistence to serve his master by any means necessary, and the dog's name is Bobby. Now that may make you realise that there is a Harry Potter character with a very, very similar name who is also very much entirely based on the idea of loyalty and devotion and refusing to disobey his master under any circumstances. Who is that character? That is the correct answer. What's your house again? 20 points to Gryffindor, and that's probably the only points I'll award on the whole tour because I forget, so you may have won the House Cup just from that. But yes, Dobby is very clearly based on Greyfriars Bobby. J.K. Rowling has also said as much. It is very much a character based around one key trait, loyalty, and Bobby is a story based around one key theme, loyalty. And all you have to do is swap one letter and you get Dobby from Bobby. You can actually see Bobby just across the road,
Yeah.
with a tiny little statue there. A little public service announcement I like to do on my tours. There is a tradition that involves rubbing Bobby's nose to get good luck. If you could avoid it, it would be better, because the dog has quite a detailed small face, and if you keep rubbing its nose, it does slowly flatten, and Bobby is quite a lot shorter in the nose than he was when that statue was first built now. So if we can avoid rubbing Bobby's nose, that'd be great. But follow me in this way and we're gonna go have a look. Right guys, so we got a much nicer view from Victoria Street earlier of George Heriot School, but this is the same building on the other side of this gate, and it has a quite massive link to Harry Potter, as we talked about earlier, being the big inspiration for Hogwarts, but I haven't quite explained why yet. Well, here we go. So, the George Heriot School, first of all, has a really interesting history of its own. It was founded by a man named George Heriot, as you might have guessed, and it was funded in the middle of the 1600s, like 1660s, and George Heriot had a nickname. Most people knew George Heriot as the Jingling Geordie. And they knew him as that because Geordie in the UK is just a slang term for someone from Newcastle, which is what George Heriot was. And he jingled because he was incredibly rich. And all of his pockets were filled with gold and coins and things like that. And as he walked around, he would jingle, because George Heriot's job was that he was the official goldsmith to James VI. He was a very, very rich man. But he didn't hoard all of that wealth. He was incredibly generous. George Heriot was famous for wandering around Edinburgh throwing money to anyone that looked like they needed some cash. And when he ended up dying, he left all of the rest of his money to go into this school. A school specifically built for the poorest people in Edinburgh to get a completely free education for the first time in all of Scottish history. Specifically, it was set up for the poor orphaned boys of Edinburgh, in the words of George Heriot. It is still the 1600s, so unfortunately it was still only boys at that time, but it was very much a step forwards in terms of social mobility for the working classes. Suddenly, people could actually get an education who couldn't before. It's a little while to go before everyone can get an education, but it's a step. So, George Heriot funds this school, he pays for all the educations of all of these poor children who couldn't get one otherwise, and it's a great thing that George Heriot did. Things have changed slightly since then, because at the end of the 1800s, Edinburgh Council realised quite how much money they could make out of this school, and so at the end of the 1800s, this became a private school, and it's now the most expensive private school in Scotland. So times have changed slightly for the George Heriot School, but they do say to this day that they keep up the values of George Heriot by offering bursaries still every year. So some people can still come to the school free. So don't worry, it's all fine. I have to say that. One time I actually was doing this bit when someone who worked at the school came out through the gate, and I was really slagging off George Heriot School, and since then I've been a lot more apprehensive about it. But George Heriot School to this day does still offer some bursaries every year, so some people can attend the school completely free still to this day. They do still do some good work for charities in the local area. They're just not quite what they used to be. Now, what is interesting about this school, though, is that J.K. Rowling sent two of her daughters here, and she sent both her daughters here under radically different circumstances. Her first daughter, she sent here while J.K. Rowling was living on benefits. Her daughter was 4, she started school here, and that's the thing. This school isn't actually for children the ages of Hogwarts students. This school is, well, under the Scottish school system, which is different to the English, and so still very confusing. It's kind of, I guess the best way to describe it is, from like the beginning of primary school up to like, I guess the end of what would be like American middle school. It's kind of that age range. They have boarders, people can stay at the school as well. They have a lot more people that just come for the day and go home. But they do have boarding houses where people can stay as well. And the school looks a lot like the way Hogwarts is described in the books. It has a tower in each of its 4 corners, a massive clock tower in the middle where some quite significant spoiler events happen in the end of the 6th book. That big clock tower in the middle. Quite see from this angle, but you can see it from up on Victoria Street. And the students here are sorted into 4 houses. The colours red, blue, green, and white actually, but close enough. Those 4 house colours are the colours of George Heriot School, with the slight change of white becoming yellow. They are the Hogwarts house colours, and a lot of things were picked up from that school and put into the Harry Potter books. It's the school she knew most about, but her first daughter attended this school completely free because J.K. Rowling was on benefits at the time and received the bursary. Her final daughter, J.K. Rowling obviously paid the highest possible fees that you can pay at this school, because by that time, I believe when her second daughter started school, J.K. Rowling was officially the richest woman in the world at that point, and so was paying huge amounts for her daughter to go to school here by that point in the later 2000s. But both of J.K. Rowling's daughters did go here. This is the school she knew most about while she was living here in Edinburgh, because her daughters were going here. She would pick up her daughters from this gate, so where we're standing right now is where she'd wait to pick up her daughters from school, and so it's no surprise that she spent a lot of time on this graveyard too. And on the subject of that, graveyards in Edinburgh are very different from graveyards anywhere else in the world, for one reason. It's a massive cultural thing, and that reason is a massive wall. Because Edinburgh used to be surrounded by this massive wall that protected it against any attacking armies or whatever throughout the Middle Ages, but it also limited the city severely. It meant that everything was pressed as close together as it could be to try and fit as much into Edinburgh as could be fit into it. And that meant that there were no parks, there were no nice green open spaces to relax with your family and sunbathe and have picnics, nothing like that. What there was though, was graveyards. There were a couple of graveyards which they obviously needed so they could bury their dead in Edinburgh, and what that meant is that the graveyards were the only open green spaces in the entirety of Edinburgh. So people wanting picnics and sunbathing would have to come to the graveyards. Throughout the Middle Ages, this is the only place you could come, and it would be constantly people sunbathing, people having picnics, stuff like that, up until we get to the modern day. And if you come here on a slightly less windy day than this, you will still find people sunbathing. I saw someone just lying on the grass with sunglasses doing some sketching on a sketch pad yesterday. It's incredibly common still in Edinburgh to this day. It's just a big cultural difference that we have with graveyards anywhere else. Here in Edinburgh, graveyards are not just a place for burying the dead. They are also parks. They're the same thing here. And so J.K. Rowling spent a lot of time walking around this park with her baby daughter in her arms while her older daughter had started school, waiting to pick up her older daughter, and it's therefore no surprise that she took a lot of inspiration from this graveyard. So if you want to turn towards this corner, you will see a plaque to a man named William McGonagall. William McGonagall's name may be slightly familiar to you as Minerva McGonagall from the Harry Potter series. That is where that name comes from. That plaque on that wall right there, right next to where J.K. Rowling would pick her kids up from school. The real William McGonagall is not quite as cool a person as the McGonagall that ended up in the Harry Potter books, though. The real William McGonagall, it says they're poet and tragedian. What they're saying there, in a very kind way, is that he was a tragic poet. And I don't mean the genre of poetry, I mean skill level. William McGonagall was famous for being a terrible, terrible poet. The main thing he was famous for is that his rhyme schemes were awful. He would generally go with one rhyme and stick with it all the way through the poem. Every line would end in the same rhyme. William McGonagall only managed some moderate success because of the fact that rich people started using him as a kind of prank gift. They would commission McGonagall as a direct inspiration, but I would also assume if you go to any graveyard in the entirety of the UK, you will find several graves that have names that are similar to names in Harry Potter on them, just by coincidence. So what separates the coincidence from the ones that are actually real? Well, here in Greyfriars, there are a ton of graves people claim are inspiration for Harry Potter characters. The truth is, there are only 3 that we can say for definite. William McGonagall is one of those 3, and another one is Elizabeth Moody, right here. The name Moody on this grave did inspire the character of Mad-Eye Moody. Alistair Moody, that is correct, yes. Alistair or Mad-Eye Moody, who enters as the Defence Against the Dark Arts teacher in disguise in book 4, and then it's not really him. All kinds of dramatic twists, but that name did come from this gravestone. And there's one other grave in this graveyard that J.K. Rowling took a name from, and it is by far the biggest name of the 3. Though before we do, there is one thing I forgot to say about McGonagall, which is the strange coincidence I mentioned earlier. Maybe not as much of a coincidence as it seems, but the thing with the character of McGonagall that's really interesting is that J.K. Rowling originally based the character on Maggie Smith. J.K. Rowling had seen a film from the 90s where Maggie Smith plays this old, stern German school teacher, and based on that character, she wrote the character of McGonagall, and then when they came to casting, J.K. Rowling's first choice was obviously Maggie Smith, and because Maggie Smith said yes, the circle became complete, and it is just a nice thing where the character was inspired by Maggie Smith, and then Maggie Smith played the character, which is nice. But we are now going to see the final grave, the one that the people that know about it have been waiting for. If you follow me down to the bottom of this hill, we will see the grave of Tom Riddle. Follow me. Down here is the grave of Tom Riddle. To see it, you'll have to go round these barriers and down into that area there. We can't stop and talk about it all in there, because there'll be other people that want to go see it. But we'll talk here, and then you can all go down there and get any photos you want. So, Tom Riddle, you'll notice when you go see the grave, is spelt slightly differently. The Riddle is spelt R-I-D-D-E-L-L instead of R-I-D-D-L-E like it is in the Harry Potter books. And there is obviously a reason for that in the Chamber of Secrets. A big plot point is that the words Tom Marvolo Riddle are rearranged to spell I am Lord Voldemort, so for that to work, she twisted the letters around a little bit. But we do actually have two Tom Riddles buried here. We have Tom Riddle Sr. and Tom Riddle Jr., which means that technically that is two characters from Harry Potter, because Tom Riddle's dad in Harry Potter is also called Tom Riddle, and so we do have both Tom Riddles buried here in Greyfriars Kirkyard. Here's the interesting thing about the anagram thing, though, is that when you want to change the letters and spell Voldemort, that works great if his name's Tom Marvolo Riddle and you're saying, I am Lord Voldemort. Unfortunately, if you're using any language that isn't English, you might not be saying the I am part. That might be different. And so, in different translations of the Harry Potter books, Tom Riddle's name does have to change to make the anagrams work. And so you'll be surprised to find that in a lot of the translations of Harry Potter, Tom Riddle has completely different names. Has anyone here read Harry Potter in a language that isn't English? Yeah, what language? In Spanish. What's he called in Spanish? Can you remember? He is Tom Riddle in Spanish, and is there just an asterisk explaining the anagram thing? Or they just don't bother really. Okay, that's fair.
In Brazilian, we call Silvo Riddle.
Oh really? What's that middle name? Silvo. That's good. Oh, okay, so there you go, yeah. So in the English version it is Marvolo Riddle, and in the Brazilian and presumably also the Spanish version, it is, Silvo Riddle. Nice. So, in the French version, Tom gets a slightly less intimidating name than Marvolo or Silvo, because they have to spell Je suis Tom Riddle. Instead, Je suis Lord Voldemort, sorry, they have to change his middle name, so his name in the French version is Tom Elvis Riddle, which is nice. But, oh no, it's not, it's Tom Elvis Jedusor, not even Riddle. But the most bizarre version is the Danish version, because the Danish version, he has an initial, which completely doesn't work with an anagram, because they've just chosen to ignore the rest of whatever that name is. But Tom Riddle's full name in the Danish translation of Harry Potter is Romeo G. Detlev Jr. The G in there really throws things off, because what does that stand for? Why are they not using the rest of the letters? But it is, the full name is Romeo G. Detlev Jr. if you look up the Danish version of Harry Potter, just to make that anagram work. There are some versions where they use different alphabets, of course, that aren't the Latin alphabet, and in most of those ones they'll just put an asterisk in the bottom of the page and say, there's a joke here that works in English, but it doesn't really work in this alphabet, so let's not bother trying. In most of the versions that are in any kind of, like Mandarin or anything like that has a different, a completely different alphabet, they will tend to just explain it in an asterisk at the bottom and not bother doing all of the legwork of making it work. But that's all I have on Tom Riddle, guys. So feel free to... Also about the way that the death of J.K. Rowling's mother just before she started writing the books had a massive impact on J.K. Rowling's life, obviously, and also on the Harry Potter series. Because J.K. Rowling's mother actually passed away from MS, from multiple sclerosis, just before J.K. Rowling started writing the series, and that had a massive impact and inspired quite a lot of things that ended up in the Harry Potter books. Especially, the biggest example of that is the Dementors, which are monsters invented by J.K. Rowling as a visual metaphor for depression, and the depression that she felt after the death of her mother while she was trying to write these books. The idea of these creatures that just suck all of the joy out of you and make everything cold and emotionless is really like the hauntingly beautiful metaphor that she created for that kind of feeling that you can have. One guess what the link might be between this area and the Harry Potter series. That actually, the name Potter there has nothing to do with the Harry Potter series. The reason that this street is called Potter Row is because of a Potter who used to live near here. It was named a very long time ago, and J.K. Rowling did not actually take any inspiration from the name Potter here for the name Potter Potter in the Harry Potter books. The Potter family in the Harry Potter books are actually named after a family friend of the Rowling family, a family called the Potters that they knew growing up, and didn't have a member of their family called Harry or Lily or James. They all have different names, but that is where she got the surname Potter from, these childhood friends. But this is another big inspiration for Harry Potter because, again, of those sketches that J.K. Rowling did. Back when she was doing this help with the set design on the earlier films and on some of the later films, she did a sketch of this. She actually did a sketch of this underpass right here for the 5th Harry Potter film as a reference point for what the alleyway in which Dudley and Harry confront a Dementor should look like. So, a slightly niche one here, probably the most niche of these sketches that she did. But this was used as a big part of the set design. You can actually see that they used the same sloped-in sides in that scene if you rewatch that scene from the 5th film. But we didn't walk all this way just to see an underpass that J.K. Rowling drew once. We are actually going to see the real birthplace of Harry Potter. I'm saying the birthplace of Harry Potter and the fact that it might not be entirely true. Well, if there was a true birthplace of Harry Potter in Edinburgh, it would be down at the bottom of this street. If you look down towards the corner there, you can see on the 2nd floor there is a building that has a red picture of a spoon on the side there. That building there is, well, the top part is now Spoon and the bottom floor is now a cafe called Black Medicine. But back in the 90s, those two floors were the same cafe, and it was a cafe called the Nicholson Cafe, named after Nicholson Street, the street that it's on. Now, the Nicholson Cafe was owned by J.K. Rowling's brother-in-law, her sister's husband, who she'd actually lived with for quite a while before she moved into her own place. If you remember earlier, we were talking about that. So, if we're thinking about J.K. Rowling, she likes to walk around, she likes to walk to a cafe and sit and drink coffees while she's writing her books. She's living on benefits, she doesn't have a huge amount of money at the time. Do we think it's more likely that she's going to write in the Elephant House or at the place that her brother-in-law owns and she can get free coffee at? And so J.K. Rowling has mentioned in quite a lot of interviews that the early books of Harry Potter were mostly written from sitting inside that building right there. Obviously, the Nicholson Cafe doesn't exist there anymore. It actually closed down in the early 2000s, and most of the people in either of those businesses get quite annoyed with Harry Potter fans coming in and asking questions. So I would still very much recommend the Elephant House as the place to go to ask your Harry Potter questions if you want to see one of the places that she wrote, because the actual birthplace of Harry Potter doesn't really exist anymore. What is interesting though is the bottom part of that cafe now is now the Black Medicine Cafe, which is still owned by J.K. Rowling's brother-in-law, because after his cafe got closed down, but then J.K. Rowling became the richest woman on earth, she bought him a new cafe, which is now the Black Medicine Cafe there. He owns it, he's not in there very often, so don't go in expecting to ask him loads of questions about J.K. Rowling. He owns the business, he's not normally working there, he does pop in occasionally, and it's also the only place in Edinburgh where I've actually seen J.K. Rowling in real life myself. The only 2 times I've ever seen her have both been in Black Medicine, so if you are searching her out, then that's probably the only place. I mean, I'm not saying you'll see her, you 99% probably won't, but it is the only place I've ever seen her, so it's maybe your best shot. Now, she actually now lives on the other side of Edinburgh in a place called Cramond, which is one of the most expensive areas of Edinburgh now, a very posh, big house. But that is the real birthplace of Harry Potter. The thing with the Elephant House is that they are still the best place to go if you are a big Harry Potter fan, you want to see somewhere she wrote, because she did definitely do a fair bit of writing after her brother-in-law's cafe closed in a few different cafes, and the Elephant House was the main one of those cafes. So if you do want to go to the Elephant House and check it out, you can. They've got all kinds of stuff going on in there. The main attraction is the toilets, which is odd to say of any cafe, but with the Elephant House, the toilets are like a Harry Potter shrine. If you go in there, you'll notice that they very much allow graffiti in the Elephant House toilets, and you can just see the impact that the Harry Potter series has had on the world in that graffiti. Messages from people talking about how it helped them get through all kinds of tough times, jokes written everywhere, all kinds of references to Harry Potter covering the entire bathrooms. Apologies, I've just poked you in the head. But basically, that's the place to go if you want to see all of that kind of stuff. The thing with the Elephant House is that nowadays, because they have so many Harry Potter fans going in just to see the toilets and leaving, they charge £1 for entry. But I am happy to say that that pound does not go to the Elephant House. They charge £1 for entry now, and all of that money goes every year. They collaborate with J.K. Rowling to choose charities to give all of that money from Harry Potter fans to, and they give thousands and thousands of pounds every year. Last year it all went to multiple sclerosis research in honour of Anne Rowling, and to this day they keep doing that every year, and it goes to different charities every single year. So if you do want to pop in and see all of those things, feel free. The Elephant House Cafe is actually right next to the graveyard that we were just in, so if you do want to visit it, it's pretty much straight up that way and turn to the right. It's the same way I'm about to be walking, so we are finishing the tour here, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, but if you do want to follow me up that way and visit the second ever Harry Potter tour, I think it went good. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your stay in Edinburgh, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Espero que tenham gostado. Deixe seu like.
Se inscreva no canal e ative o sininho das notificações. Plim, plim. E até a próxima do
Tamo na área.